And here is Steve Everly.
Great. Hi. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. People on Zoom, I'm going to try and split my attention between you and the people in the room. So welcome. I'm so grateful to be here tonight with such a dedicated group of IVC Corps members and partners. Each of you plays a pivotal role, not only in serving in the nonprofits that you partner with, but also in sustaining the mission of IVC through your generosity and ongoing support. So thank you for all that you do. And thank you again for being here tonight. My name is Steve Everly. I'm IVC's Vice President for Advancement, Marketing, and Communications. I've been with IVC for a little over 11 years. My first 6 years were spent as a director of our Baltimore region. And over the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of traveling around the country, meeting Corps members and donors like you as a representative of our national office. First, again, I want to express my deep gratitude for all that you do, both through your service with IVC and through your philanthropic support. Your generosity enables IVC to continue our mission of connecting volunteers with communities in need. And for that, we're deeply grateful. I also want to acknowledge that your contributions, whether to IVC or to other causes that are close to your heart, represent more than financial transactions. They reflect a commitment to making a difference today, helping organizations meet their current needs and fulfill their immediate missions. Regular donations, they play a vital role in sustaining the day-to-day work of nonprofits. But legacy giving is something a little different. It's about planning for the future. It's about creating a gift that will continue to make an impact long after we're gone. So while our regular donations support the present, our planned gifts help secure the future, ensuring that the causes we love continue to keep making a difference for generations to come. Legacy giving, or planned giving, it allows us to take what we've built and to ensure that it lives on well beyond our own lifetimes. It's not just about sustaining operations today, but about creating a future where the causes that are important to us continue. Legacy gifts are a way to pass the torch to those who will follow us, so that they too can experience the transformative power of service and community. I want to share a couple stories about my time with IVC and people I've met. You might know that Baltimore is where IVC was founded. So when I was the director, I had the privilege of working with some of our earliest Corps members. And in 2016, IVC Baltimore had experienced this surge in Corps members. One of our longest serving members, Tom, he'd been serving from 1997 through 2015. And he had just stepped down from active service, but he was still joining us as an emeritus member coming to our monthly meetings. And our first meeting of that year, the room was packed. And I noticed Tom seemed to be kind of quiet and reserved. I worried that maybe surrounded by all these new faces, he might be feeling out of place. I was nervous. And so I checked in with him at the end of the meeting, and his response, it really took me by surprise. He had tears in his eyes. And he's kind of a curmudgeonly guy, but he had these tears in his eyes, and he said, "I've spent 18 years loving IVC, and it was really hard to step down. But seeing all these new people here falling in love with this community, like I did, it means everything to me. I'm so happy to pass the torch and let the next generation experience what IVC meant to me." And Tom's story, I think, is a perfect example of what legacy giving is about. It's about passing that torch. It's about ensuring that the missions that we care deeply about can continue to thrive for those who are going to come after us. One other story, just last week, I met another one of our founding Corps members, Tony. Tony and his wife, Julia, had served with IVC from its very beginning. During our visit, I asked Tony what he thought Julia would be most proud of during her time with IVC. Julia had served in prison ministry. She was helping incarcerated men build resumes to prepare their life for after their release. And for many of these men, they didn't see how their life experiences could translate into work skills. And so Julia would say things like, she would ask questions like, did you take care of your siblings? Did you make the meals? And they would say, yes. And then she'd show them that those were real skills: childcare, meal preparation, time management. Through her work, Julia held a mirror up to those men and said, look at what I see in you. You are more than you think you are. Some of those men found jobs after they were released. Others came back to prison and met with Julia again. And she understood that the road to recovery is a long one. But Julia stood for their dignity, especially when it was hardest for them to see it for themselves. And that's the legacy of IVC Corps members. It's more than just checking off tasks or achieving deliverables. It's about finding God in all things and seeing the dignity in every person, even when they can't see it for themselves. So legacy giving is about ensuring that the values that you work and care for most continue to thrive, no matter which cause or mission is closest to your heart. It allows us to extend the impact of our lives far beyond our time here. And through a planned gift, we can ensure that the things that we believe in, the causes that we hold dear, they continue to touch lives and create change for generations to come. Think about the stories of Tom and Julia. Both of them left behind something deeper than just their service. They left a legacy of hope, of dignity, of transformation. They transformed the lives they touched. And again, that's the power of legacy giving. Sorry, I'm working on an iPad here. The opportunity to make a lasting difference long after we're gone. So planned giving, it allows us to think about the kind of legacy we want to leave and what values and missions are to come. So as we move forward in today's workshop, I invite you to reflect on your own legacy. How will the love and service that you give today continue to shape the lives tomorrow? Planned giving offers a way for you to ensure that IVC and the nonprofits we serve, the nonprofits that you hold dear, can keep making a difference long into the future. So thank you for your commitment and service and your generosity. Together, we're building something that lasts. So let's continue passing the torch and building a legacy of hope and dignity together. I'd like now to turn this over to kind of our main MC for tonight, Mr. Arthur Bergeron. Arthur is he's a Corps member here in Boston. He does this work. He's done this work for a living. He does this work as part of his service with IVC, and he's going to walk us through a bit more about what exactly it means to make a planned gift.
Thanks, Steve. Briefly, first of all, I'm going to check to see if my slides are really working. Yes, they are. This is very exciting. So once again, as brief background, my name is Arthur Bergeron. I'm an elder law attorney. This is all I do. One of the reasons I started focusing on legacy giving was that about 15 years ago, I joined a large firm so that I could do nothing but elder law, which involves dealing with seniors while they're alive and after they're dead. And one of the things that I found over that time, I've did about 2,300 estate plans for folks. Median value about $1.5 million per estate plan. Only about 40 people of all of those people were making any legacy gifts. So I decided to semi-retire, which is what I'm doing now, in order to try to focus on this issue to help people think about legacy giving. I just lost my PowerPoint. And I have never had any technical skills, and that's why there's this great person next to me that I can turn to so that I don't have to figure anything out. I can just talk about this. But my purpose here is not to convince you that there is a particular entity to which you might want to give a legacy. I'm going to be talking about giving smart, which is giving in such a way that if you've decided that you do want to help somebody, that your gift is being matched by the IRS and the Department of Revenue, two people to whom you really have no interest in making a legacy gift, and two people, but people to whom you're going to be giving some of the money to if you don't give it to the nonprofit. So that's what this is about. So to start off, It's frozen now. Why did that work? So, to start off, I just want to give you some context. I'm going to talk about this couple that I always talk about when I'm doing presentations. They're Frank and Mary. I always talk about Frank and Mary and their kids, Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. And I always tell people, if you're old enough to get the joke, you're old enough to be my client. Next slide. And their goal is very simple. They want to live in their house until they die. They want to be buried in the backyard. That's all. They want to leave everything to their kids. They want to minimize taxes. So if this sounds like you, this presentation is for you. Next slide. But in order to try to help you kind of figure out how this might be relevant to you, I gave Frank and Mary some numbers in terms of their assets and their income. So they own a house. They bought it for $100,000 35 years ago. It's worth $800,000 now. This probably sounds familiar. 30 years ago, they bought on a tip. They bought shares of Berkshire Hathaway for $920. Those shares are now worth $400,000 on the market, right? Frank has an IRA. He worked hard. He's got an IRA for $800,000. Mary's got one worth $400,000. They've got savings of $100,000. So their total assets are $2.5 million. Their income, well, Frank's getting his required minimum distribution on all that money every year, but he's now 80 years old. So on all of that money, he's getting $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year. And his that's 5%, which is what his required minimum distribution is at age 80. He's getting Social Security, 12 times $2,000 a month. 85% of that is taxable. Mary's getting $15,300 in taxable Social Security money. And Mary's RMD on her $400,000 in IRA is another $20,000. So their income is $95,700. Now, as a result of that, in Massachusetts, federally, their marginal income tax rate is 22%, and their Massachusetts rate is 5%. That's going to become relevant to you as you see some of these slides. Now, look at that. I did that myself. So the question then is, I'm getting applause here from the room. So the question then is, what if they decide instead of, by the way, just during their lives, right now, if say they want to write a check to somebody and they've got 3 favorite causes, they're all Ignatian volunteers. And by the way, I should mention, I'm also an Ignatian volunteer. I volunteer at a school in Worcester called Nativity School. So suppose they want to give some money to Haley House, which has an Ignatian volunteer there, or to the Ignatian Spirituality Project, any one of those. And these people are always, of course, asking them for money because they're always broke. And they're saying to these people, this is all tax deductible. But first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about giving in general. So say instead of Frank and Mary giving any money to any of these nonprofits, they decided they're just going to give some money to their daughter, Mary Jr., because she's going to buy a house. So the question is, what's the tax consequence to that of them? The answer is nothing. Nothing. They can just give $200,000 to Mary so that she can buy a house. But wait a minute, you're all saying, no, I can't do that. There's a limit to the amount that I can give. Well, actually, that's all a myth. There is no Massachusetts gift tax. And by the way, the receipt of a gift by Mary is not income. So you give it to Mary, she gets this $200,000 to buy the house. She doesn't have to report that anywhere. So there's no Massachusetts gift tax. As a result, you can give away all of your money the day before you die and avoid the estate tax. Well, at the federal level, somebody figured that out. And they said, well, we can't let that happen. So they adopted a combined gift and estate tax system. The way the system works is that if you die having assets over a particular amount, which is now $13.61 million, you owe an estate tax. If you make a gift, you owe a gift tax unless you qualify for one of the 2 exclusions, the ones that everybody knows about and the one that nobody knows about. The one that everybody knows about is that there's some amount per person per year that you can give to people, which used to be $10,000, but it's gone up with inflation and it's now $18,000. And everybody knows about that. The other one, though, is that in addition to that, you have a lifetime gift tax exclusion equal to the estate tax exclusion. $13.61 million. So unless you're going to be giving over your lifetime more than $13.61 million, there is no gift tax. So what about, though, instead, if you want to give that check to Haley House? Because Haley House says, but you know, and it's a great thing and it's tax deductible. Well, is it? Well, and that's true. That's true, but kind of not really. So first of all, you need to understand whenever you're making a gift, you're never making a gift in order to make money. You're never going to, actually get money back because you're making the gift. What you're doing, though, if you're giving smart, is you're giving in a way that you're going to get a match from the IRS or the Department of Revenue. So let's talk about that $1,000 to Haley House. That $1,000 is tax deductible, right? And if it's tax deductible, that means of that $1,000, you're only giving really $730 because the IRS is giving $220. That's the money you were going to pay them. And the Department of Revenue is giving $50 because that's the money you would have paid them out of that $1,000 if it's really tax deductible. But the issue is, for it to be really tax deductible, that gift, together with all of your other deductible expenses, has to be higher than the standard deduction. And the standard deduction went way up in the first Trump administration. And for seniors is now $32,300. So in order for your gift to be tax deductible, it and all of your other deductions, like your mortgage interest, your real estate taxes, all of these things have to add up to more than $32,300. For clients of mine, my seniors, that just about never happens, which means as a practical matter, when you're making that gift, you're really not getting the IRS or the Department of Revenue to kick in anything. By the way, if you were making that gift for more than that high number, $32,300, and you wanted to give $1,000, because of the fact that you're getting these matches from the IRS or the Department of Revenue, you may want to just give them $1,000, knowing, or give them actually $1,370, because out of that you're giving them really $1,000 of your money. The IRS is throwing in the $300 you were going to pay them, and the Department of Revenue is throwing in the $70 that you were going to pay them. But let's go back for a second. What about if instead of giving them the Haley House the $1,000, you said, I'm going to tell my IRA administrator, and all seniors, not all seniors, but just about all seniors have an IRA, right? I'm going to tell my administrator before the end of the year to send a check to Haley House for $1,000, right? Now, if they do that, then instead of Frank, let's say it's Frank's money, instead of Frank getting $40,000 that he was going to get in his requirement minimum distribution, they're only going to send him $39,000. They're going to send the other $1,000 to Haley House. But as a result of that, Frank is not paying the $220 that he was going to have paid to the IRS. So Frank is really only giving $780 to the IRS. And out of the wonderfulness of their hearts, the IRS is throwing in a match. Now, once again, there are some issues regarding making those gifts. It has to be done by the end of the year in which you're going to be getting that RMD, and the money has to come directly from the administrator who is administering that money. So don't call them the day before the end of the year and say, I want to send the $1,000 check. You got to give them 30 days notice or whatever. So that's one possibility. A second possibility for Frank and Mary. Remember those stock that they bought for $1,000 and they're now worth $400,000? Well, if they sell those stock, they're going to be paying a 15% federal capital gains tax and a 5% state capital gains tax. What about if instead they give those stock or one or two of them to Haley House worth $1,000? As a practical matter, then Frank and Mary are really only giving $800 because they're giving something which, if they had cashed it in, they would have only gotten $800. The IRS is kicking in their share, $150. The Department of Revenue is throwing in some money. Now, there is a cap on the total amount of capital gains gifts that you can give, but during your lifetime, that's how you give money today, is by getting those by using qualified charitable distributions or by giving stock. But what about legacy giving? What are Frank and Mary's greatest fears? Death? Well, maybe. You know, you get to our age, I'm 74 myself. You know, it's like death is death. It's going to come. Their real fear, running out of money before they die. That's what they really worry about. But you know, once you're dead, you're dead. You know, this problem has gone away. So the only question now is, do Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. really need all $2.5 million of the money that you save? Now, maybe that you've done, maybe they do. Maybe you've got you've got a disabled child. You've got any number of reasons why you've got a significant problem, but maybe they don't. And in the vast majority of my clients' cases, they don't, right? So the question then is, how much should you be considering giving to a nonprofit? Well, suppose that these are the three organizations. And once again, you have to already kind of feel that there's some organization you think is important and that you are interested in making a legacy gift, because as Steve emphasized, what is a legacy gift? A legacy gift is taking a cause or an organization that you think is so important that it should be there forever, forever. That's your legacy. Your legacy is your kids, and your legacy is this organization. So the question is, how much should you be giving? Well, God told us 10%. That's how much you're supposed, the tithe. You've always heard about this. I called my son-in-law's father, the rabbi, and I said, did God really say 10%? He said, oh yeah, he said 10%. I said, where did he say that? He immediately says, Deuteronomy 14:22. I said, how did you know that? He said, I'm a rabbi. I read the book. I know the book. So it's 10%. So just figure you're thinking 10%. So now, but and of course there's an alternative. You may want to just cross God and not give the 10%. But that's kind of like your question. So the question then is, so suppose they're giving their 10%. So 10% of $2.5 million. What's the result of that? Well, Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. now are only getting $750,000 apiece, right? And the other 10% is going to charity. And what happens to that $250,000? Well, out of that, if Frank died with an estate of $2.5 million, his Massachusetts estate tax was going to be $39,680. If he gives away that $250,000, so that his remaining estate is only $2,250,000, he's dropped his estate tax by $20,000 to $19,680. So he immediately saves on that. But once again, go back to Frank's IRA, right? If he's giving that IRA to his kids, assume that his kids are paying the same tax rate that he is paying, which is unlikely. Chances are his kids are paying a lot more in federal estate tax, but assume it's the same rate, 22%, and that they all live in Massachusetts and they're paying the 5% Massachusetts tax for a total tax of 27%. Now, whoops. So imagine now Frank made that legacy gift of $250,000, right? But all of it out of his IRA. And by the way, remember, in order for this to work, the money has to come out of the IRA. You have to change the name of your death beneficiary on the IRA to be the nonprofit. It can't be dropped into the estate and then come out of the estate. That doesn't work. By the way, that's also one of the other reasons why this is so terrific. You don't have to call your lawyer and change your estate plan. You don't have to change the will. You don't have to change the trust. All you do is call your IRA administrator and say, change the death beneficiary. I want $250,000 to be going to my charity. In that case, what happens? Well, the estate tax of $20,000 the Department of Revenue is going to take, that's gone, right? They've made a donation. The $55,000 that your kids were going to pay in federal income tax, that's gone. The $12,500 that your kids were going to pay in state tax, that's gone. So out of that $250,000, the IRS and the Department of Revenue are providing $87,500 in a match. And Frank is only throwing in $162,500, right? So once again, if you're interested in giving, the question is, where do you give? Now, suppose though, you've got these nonprofits and they're doing great work, but you're saying, I don't know about, the Ignatian Spirituality Project is doing terrific things, but are they money managers? Do they want to be money managers? No, they want to be doing the important things that they're doing. Same thing with Haley House. Haley House has been around for a long time.
Almost 60 years.
As a Catholic worker house for like 60 years. One of the reasons I was able to actually get my wife to come to this presentation is that she had worked for a Catholic worker house in San Francisco as a Jesuit volunteer. Seems like 60 years ago. It's not quite that. It was just like a long time ago. But is Haley House a money manager? Well, maybe they are, but the point is maybe not, right? So in that case, what you may want to consider, right, is using a so-called donor advised fund, right? These as a matter of fact, we have the next speaker comes from Fidelity Charitable. Fidelity Charitable, which is actually a 501c3, a charitable entity, right? Which came from Fidelity. A lot of people who are listening to this program, including us, have money at Fidelity, right? So and so that you could donate the money or give the money, quote unquote, to Fidelity through a donor advised fund to make sure that your money is going to end up going to the charity that you want to give. Now, I am running close on time, so I do not want to go through in detail the three ways that you always hear about when you hear about charitable giving. You always hear about these three kind of more technical ways of giving. These would be specifically if you're alive, you want to make a gift of that stock, but you want to not just give it all away. You want to still get some kind of an income from that stock because you really feel like Frank and Mary, you can't afford to leave it all because you're not dead yet, right? In which case, you may want to make a gift from which you still can get an income stream. One way is to buy a so-called charitable gift annuity, to give the money to the nonprofit in return for an annuity, basically, that they give you that says that they're going to pay you so much every month or every year for the rest of your life, with the remainder to go to charity. And I won't go through the numbers on this. You should talk to your financial advisor or your lawyer about this. Or you could create your own charitable remainder unitrust, where you actually name the charity to which the stock or the real estate that you have, whatever it is that's appreciated in value, is going to go. Your trustee then sells those assets and uses that money, but some of the money, gives it back to you, and then gives a lot of it to the charity. This allows you to get both the charitable deduction and to spread out the time in which your capital gains tax is going to be paid. Now, I just want to close, though, by having you think about the effect that this could have from the perspective of the charity, whether it's the Ignatian Spirituality Project, Haley House, whatever the entity is that maybe you as an Ignatian volunteer think is really special. I'm just going to talk about the Ignatian Spirituality Project and also the Ignatian Volunteer Corps, which is kind of like the reason why I'm here. So the way that you think about the way this legacy could really affect you would really be by thinking about this from the perspective of the foundation or the money managers, the people who are managing these kinds of funds and kicking off money from those funds in order to sustain organizations. So the way you figure out how you can make a donation, how you and others can make a donation so that the organization can last forever, is by basically taking their budget and multiplying by 25. And that's the amount of legacy money that, if they had it kicked off 4% per year, which is, whenever you talk to these folks, in these financial folks, they're always saying, yes, give us the money, we can kick off 4% per year forever. Now, I don't know how they figured this out, but they did. But as a result of that, you can actually figure out how much money you really need. So, but the Ignatian Volunteer Corps, for example, here in New England, the total budget is less than $400,000. I want to say it's like $250,000? $200,000. But I was very generous on this one. I said, well, let's say it was $400,000, because the director got a raise because he's really like, he's been living on nothing for all these years because they have, they just have more staff. So say $400,000 a year, multiply by 25, that's $10 million. So if they had legacy gifts equaling $10 million, they could run forever. They would generate $400,000 forever, right? Think about that at the national level. I remember talking to Mary McGinnity in the spring, actually, and one of the reasons why this presentation ended up happening. I was talking to her, the woman who runs the Ignatian Volunteer Corps National, and we were talking about, I think I remember from a conversation, this was after a glass of wine, but I think she said $3 million a year is about what the budget is that it has or would like. Multiply by 25, $75 million, right? If legacy gifts of $75 million were there, right, that would generate 4% or $3 million forever. So these organizations would never have to go through this exercise. Once again, think about how, but that sounds like a tremendous amount of money. Go back to that example. Go back to the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. Once again, my average estate plan, I don't know what your estate is, but my average estate plan is $1.5 million. What's that? It's an IRA and a house in Massachusetts, right? 10% of that is $150,000. At that rate, it would take 66 plans to get to $10 million. But that isn't a lot of people because this isn't going to happen over 1 year. It's going to happen over a number of years. $75 million sounds like a lot of money, but it's 500 plans across the country, right? And as a result, the legacy is there and the organization goes forever. So anyway, that's everything I have to say about Giving Smart. Now I'd like to introduce Kyle Casarino who's going to talk to you for a few minutes about the Fidelity Charitable and how those kinds of programs, how by giving money to Fidelity Charitable, they can manage your money and then be giving it to these nonprofits and really allow the organization to stay forever. Kyle?
Sure. Slide right in here. Excellent. Well, thanks all for having me. I always like to start off and tell folks that I represent the part of Fidelity that I can confidently say only part of Fidelity that gets excited about people giving their money out. So I've been with the organization now 11 years. And when I started at Fidelity Charitable, we were basically a startup at Fidelity. We had 70 employees, 50,000 donors. It took us 22 years to get to that level. And then the last 10, 11 years, then grown our program to now over 500,000 individual donors. We have over 750 employees. And right now we're sitting on about $63 billion of charitable assets. So the growth in this space is pretty astronomical, and Art covered a lot of the reasons why. I always like to tell folks that if you're giving cash to charity, like that's the worst asset you could possibly give, right? Because what does it cost somebody to give cash to charity? You either have to realize as income, pay income tax on it, or you have to sell an appreciated asset and pay capital gains. That's what it costs somebody to give cash to charity. So most of the contributions that we see in our donor advised fund program are of the appreciated variety. So in order to get these great tax benefits, you have to hold the shares or the appreciated asset for a year or more. Okay, so they have to be long-term in nature. And you have to have growth in them because the IRS incentivizes you to do this. They give you two tax benefits. So not only do they give you the value of the asset on the day that you move it into the charity from a deduction standpoint, you also don't have to pay the capital gains tax on the growth. Okay, so the easy example is you bought Apple for $20,000 5 years ago. Now it's worth $50,000. That donor can put $1,000 to their favorite donor advised fund, get a $50,000 tax deduction, not pay capital gains on the $30,000 of growth. And oh, by the way, it only costs that donor $20,000 to now give $50,000 out to their favorite charities. But the thing is, people always come to me like, okay, but wait a second, like I like Apple. I want to keep that in my portfolio. I don't want to get rid of that thing. So I always tell people, you're going to give cash to charity anyway, give the appreciated stock, put the cash right back in your investment account and just buy back the Apple shares. That way, when you're not as bullish about it in 4 or 5 years, when you sell it, you're going to pay the capital gains tax on today's value and that future value, not when you bought it 5 years ago and that future value. Okay, so it's such an easy technique, but cash, not the right asset to give to charity. For those in the room that we can just do a quick refresher is how donor advised funds work. These are accounts at Fidelity that essentially help an individual or a company separate the timing of their tax benefits with when they actually have to give the money to charity. Okay, so they take the tax deduction on the way into the donor advised fund. To Art's point, we're a 501c3 charity, just like the Red Cross would be. and the donor gets the tax benefits right then and there. The assets inside the donor advised fund grow tax-free outside of the estate. And then donors use these accounts like a charitable wallet, right? They send funds to their favorite nonprofits totally at their own pace in their own time. There is no dollar value or percentage that has to go out of the donor advised fund annually. But we do have minimums that we make donors do. So we want them to at least send one grant out every other year. Most people are a lot more philanthropic than that. One of the things that's always like the myth of the donor advised fund is that you have to be super rich to do this, right? Like you have to be giving hundreds of $1,000s a year to charity to make this worth it. Folks don't know is like, I said before, it's like $63 billion in our platform. That makes like an average account size about 150K. Our median account size is about $19,000. So 60% of our accounts are under 25K. And a lot of that changed because of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2016, where your standard deduction was doubled. So it made it a lot harder for people to itemize their deductions. There's three major deductions left that you can actually use to itemize. There's mortgage interest, there's state and local tax, that's your property tax, but that's capped at $10,000 a year, and charitable giving. So if those three numbers don't get over the $32,000 mark, you're going to take the standard deduction. So I think most people realized over the years that they were giving to charity, but having no tax benefits for it, which launched our program to really ultra heights, because now people are like, you know what, I want to be more thoughtful with my giving. I'm going to put 5 or 10 years worth of my giving into my donor advised fund so they can itemize that year, take the standard deductions in future years, all the while they're giving to the same charities at the same pace they always have. So now you're getting the tax benefits for giving, but now you're being more strategic with it. And by the way, the assets inside are growing tax-free. So maybe year 6, you're sending out funds to your favorite charity that you wouldn't have if you were just giving them the funds directly. Easy enough concept. So that's a lifetime idea. I always tell people when you give to charity, you got to look at your balance sheet and your portfolio, and you want to give the asset with the highest percentage growth, because that's the asset that when you sell it, you'll pay the most in taxes on. Easy enough. Estate planning. So now a lot of our gifts that we're getting in, we're getting old enough now, we've been around 33 years, that some of our donors, the early adopters, are passing away now, and we're starting to see huge inflows of funds from their estate. Why? Because people do their estate plan now decades before they pass away. So we don't want to take anything away from our lawyer friends, but going back and forth to your trusted estate attorney constantly and saying, hey, I need to amend the appendix on my trust. I want to add this charity, take this one out, change the percentages. It's an expensive venture long-term. So what so many people will do is they'll open a donor advised fund and they'll say, all the assets I want to leave to charity, I want to go into my donor advised fund from the estate. It makes it very clean. And now, folks don't know this either, is that, like, let's say you have a Fidelity IRA account and you name 5 or 10 charities directly. It's fine to do, and it's the same benefits estate tax-wise. But all those charities, what they have to do is they have to open accounts at Fidelity. They have to get the assets transferred into those accounts. They have to sell the assets in that account and then move the proceeds back to their own bank account. There are so many charities out there that are, I wouldn't say they're not sophisticated enough, but it's just a lot of legwork for charities. So what we do is we take all the ownership off those folks, all the assets go into the donor advised fund, and then the donor during their lifetime tells us what to do with it. So most people that have kids will leave it to the next generation. It's almost like a family foundation, keeps going on generation after generation. The next generation gives to their favorite charities. We also allow donors to name charities outright. So that example with the IRA account, if you have 10 charities listed, all those 10 charities have to do a lot of work. It's a lot of work on the executor of the estate. What we'll do is we'll just gather all those assets and then distribute them all out to the charity. So all the charity gets is a check from the donor advised fund. And then the third route, and none of these are mutually exclusive, of course, but the third route is that people like the idea of leaving a legacy is very attractive for people. And the idea too is like, hey, if you have $2, $3, $4 million in your IRA account, do you really want one charity to get all that money right away? So what folks will do is they'll say, okay, I like the idea that Fidelity can manage these assets and grow them long term. I'll create almost like an endowment where instead of giving them $3 million right away, I'll give the charity 5 or 10% of that prospectus annually. That's activated when the donor passes away. So every year that charity can rely on $50,000 or $100,000 rather than getting burdened with $3 or $4 million up front, either mismanaging the funds or not really knowing what to do with it. So those are sort of the easy wins. And I just, if you're curious, I'll just throw out a couple of stats too, is that total giving in the US is like $557 billion. Okay, that's like 3.5% of the US GDP. It's about 3 times of the addressable cell phone market in the United States. And a lot of that you think is like, okay, it's got to be huge companies or massive foundations that are doing this, but really 70% of that number is done by individuals like us in this room. So a lot of giving in America is really on the backs of everyday average Americans.
Which is us.
Which is us.
Thank
So,
you for this. Thank you very much. So now we're going to see, we're going to hear from somebody from Haley House, because one of the goals of this presentation was really to provide, people to understand for the organizations that we are now volunteering for, how a legacy gift could really affect their mission kind of in the long run. So.
Thank you, Russ, for having your picture in there. I appreciate that presentation. My name is David Hirschberg, and I'm the development director at Haley House. Tomorrow I will have been there 4 months as development director, but I actually started out at Haley House as a soup kitchen volunteer about 8 or 9 years ago, and I've been volunteering 1 Sunday a month in the soup kitchen. My professional background's all in fundraising, but when the position became open at Haley House, I was very excited to do it because I had the connection to the organization, obviously. And I should also say before I start that Haley House has benefited greatly from IVC. Our entire HR department is a man named Jim Nagel, who's been a IVC volunteer for, we were trying to count how many years, but at least since 2016. And one of the things that struck me about Jim when I joined the staff was, he did all the paperwork and the health insurance and all that good stuff. And then he wanted to go for a walk. I said, sure, let's go for a walk. And he wanted to learn all about me as a person, and he wanted me to know all about him as a person and his story. And he really exemplifies what Haley House is about, which is getting to know people and connecting with people. And if I didn't know he was an IVC volunteer, I would just assume he was another staff person. He's such a part of the organization. He's there to do the work that he does, but he also, he's just part of everything we do. He comes to our events, he donates personally, he just is involved in every aspect of our work. So I really appreciate the IVC and what an impact that can have. So very quickly, I won't take a lot of your time, but for those of you who don't know, Haley House started out, I said almost 60, it's actually 58 years ago. Haley House and I were born the same year, actually, 1966. Haley House started out as it actually started out, the two founders, John and Kathy McKenna, had a place in the South End in Boston, and they were inviting people who are homeless, men who are homeless, into their apartment to have a hot meal and to have a place to sleep. Within a couple of years, they got together a group of people and they purchased a townhouse in the South End back when that was much more affordable. It's appreciated quite a bit since then, I believe. And created the soup kitchen, which still exists to this day. The soup kitchen is where I volunteer, as I said, and we still serve meals 6 days a week. Have between 50 and 100 now co-ed people who come in. And not only depend on us for, not only have a hot meal, but have a community. And Haley House, I'm about to talk about some of the other things we do, but the common thread is that it's all about using food to build community and to build connection. So start out with the soup kitchen. We have a number of other programs now. We actually have an urban farm in Roxbury that produces, grows produce that we use some in the soup kitchen, but also that goes out directly to senior neighbors of the farm. We have a program for returning citizens called the LIFT program, a Life Foundations training. And that's a program for people who have gotten out of prison within the past year. And it's really to help them, again, develop a community with people who understand what they're going through and to help get them the resources they need to establish a stable life after prison. We also have a program called Take Back the Kitchen, which is a cooking program for at-risk youth. So we're teaching at-risk youth how to cook, but we're also not only building a community within the Take Back the Kitchen group, but everyone in the group are taking this back to their families and their communities. And everyone's benefiting from it. We also have in some ways what Haley House is best known for, not in this room, but in a lot of places, Haley House is best known for a bakery cafe that we had in Nubian Square in Roxbury. And the bakery cafe was, like it sounds, a bakery cafe, it was social enterprise, but it also was it was a community gathering place. There were art exhibitions, musical performances, poetry performances. It employed people who we say quarry friendly, so it employed people who had a quarry background. It was a place for people to get back into the workforce, and we did vocational training. The cafe closed right around the start of COVID. And, you know, it's funny, as I say, I knew Haley House through the soup kitchen. But everyone I talked to since I've come on staff talks about the bakery cafe, and they've specifically talked about the chocolate chip cookies, which I haven't had yet, but I'm very excited once we start making them again because I hear they're excellent. So what we're doing right now is we are raising money to build out a new space that's sort of across the parking lot from the old bakery cafe. That's going to be right on Washington Street, so right in the center of Nubian Square, and our plan is to do that build out first part of 2025 and open again by next summer. So we're very excited about that. Yes, we have some bakery cafe fans here, but if we were already making the cookies, I would have brought them. I'm sorry, we're not making them here. And you know, one of the things to talk about is the impact of legacy gifts, and it's an interesting story actually that just happened. This was my second or third week on staff. I got an email that came into info@Haley House from someone at Schwab. And they said, Haley House has been left some money by this donor, fill out these forms. So I immediately said, this is a scam. They're just trying to get our social security numbers. But followed up, turns out it wasn't a scam. This was a gentleman who had been giving us $100 a year for as far back as our database went, which wasn't as far back as Haley House goes. And come to find out that he had left us, his IRA, left us $940,000. Oh. Which was pretty incredible. So, you know, he's like, well, I'm good at this. No, but I just apologize. But I looked up the man online. He didn't have an obituary. There was one mention we knew that he lived in Oregon. That's where his gifts came from. There was one mention in a church bulletin that they were doing a mass for him, but otherwise, really nothing at all. So I asked Kathy McKenna, who's the co-founder of Haley House and who lives across the street. She said, oh yeah, she remembered him. He lived there he lived around the corner in the 1980s, lived by himself, and was always really good to Haley House. As you'd imagine, over the years, there have been issues. Some neighbors aren't happy about having a soup kitchen right in their neighborhood. Others are fantastic, but some aren't. And he was always a big advocate for Haley House with the neighbors. He moved away in the early 90s. And Kathy, who was executive director of Haley House until 15 years ago, said she was always so touched that he would send $100 every year, you know, because he had been away for so long. And then when I told her about this gift, she was just blown away. Wow. But the timing of this gift is such that it's going to help pay for the build out of the bakery cafe. And it's also going to give us assets that we can, you know, have, as you described, to generate revenue that we can use for operating. And it just creates a lot more stability for the organization. So that's a legacy giving success story. Mm-hmm. As I know it went very fast. Did anyone have any questions on anything?
I think we're going to do questions at the end. Also.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You did say that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. And by the way, that's just a classic example. One of the folks at death, you know, this is something this person would never have done while he was still alive because he could have needed the money, you know. But legacy giving allows you to just have such a fundamental impact in a way that just vastly more than you would ever think about giving on a day-to-day or on an annual basis. So now I'd like to have a representative from the Ignatian Spirituality Project also talk to you about what they're doing, which is, once again, these are just. That's why I love being an Ignatian volunteer. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Arthur. And what a great story. You're doing great work. Thank you, David. My name is Jay Burke, and good evening. I'm a volunteer for the Ignatian Spirituality Project ISP for short. Founded in Chicago in 1998, ISP provides spiritual companionship to men and women recovering from homelessness and addiction. Since 1998, ISP retreat weekends and companionship meetings have spread to 24 cities in the US, Canada, and Ireland. Attended by thousands over the years, hundreds in the Boston area alone, ISP gatherings are not about evangelization or preaching or religion. ISP gatherings are about spirituality and our personal relationships with God. They're about the inherent goodness and unique lives of each one in attendance. We practice radical sincerity, honesty, and respect. Possibly the best way to convey what ISP does is to share the standard opening we use at our spiritual tune-ups here in Boston. Spiritual tune-ups are the name we use for our weekly gatherings. And every time we meet, we begin with this same opening. Hello, my name is Jay, and I want to welcome you to today's tune-up. We gather together in honor and respect for the dignity of each one of us here, to have time apart from our normal lives, to remind ourselves of God's unconditional love, to reconnect with our love for one another, and to recommit to being open to this love from God, from each other, and from ourselves. In gratitude and hope, we meet, we share, and we pray. We use these words to open every single tune-up and to set the tone for the time that we'll have together. We then review some practices that have proven successful over the years. Practices like confidentiality, no preaching, no crosstalk, respecting time. Practices that follow through on our desire to respect the dignity of everyone in attendance. Practices that create a safe space for sharing, and I consider even more important, for listening. ISP co-founder Bill Creed calls it sacred listening. He goes on to say, ISP is founded on a shared commitment to the spiritual journey and the non-judgmental sharing with one another of our own sacred stories. In Boston, we traditionally host 7 weekend retreats each year, 4 for men and 3 for women, totally free to our homeless brothers and sisters. They enjoy their own private room at a regional retreat house with good food, a beautiful environment outside of the city, peace and quiet, and Ignatius's message of a God that loves them unconditionally. A God who loves them for who they are, where they are, no matter what. A personal and intimate God. And they experience this not on their own, but with 15 other men or women who have experienced homelessness and addiction, and who grow in trust and hope together over the weekend. The experience of healing and hope is a sacred privilege to behold. When asked, how did this retreat impact you? Some of the answers include, it gave me hope and stability. I am not alone in my search for spiritual growth. I was very moved by everyone's stories. It gives me hope to see others growing spiritually. It encouraged me. A new light opened for me. It brought me closer to God. Spirituality was almost non-existent until this retreat. It kickstarted my spiritual journey. And my favorite one, I am not alone. I am among brothers. I am worthy of being loved. I need to forgive myself in order to obtain all that God has in store for me. Not quite as dramatic as the weekend retreats, our spiritual tune-ups are held weekly in Boston, in person at 3 different venues. The Harvest on Vine Food Pantry in Charlestown, St. Francis House Day Shelter downtown, and Old South Church in Copley Square. Plus 3 gatherings on Zoom for a total of 6 a week. Over the past 10 years, there have been more than 1,500 spiritual tune-ups in Boston, with close to an attendance of 9,000. The impact I have seen on people's lives has been amazing. Most notably, I want to mention that most of the people who facilitate the weekend retreats and spiritual tune-ups today were originally men and women who were homeless and attended an ISP weekend in the past. Many are now housed and working and back connected with their family and looking for ways to give back. I invite you to read some of their impact stories on the ispreetreats.org website. Look for impact stories along the top of the screen. And while there, on the ispreetreats.org website, won't you please consider donating? I promise you, your donation will touch the lives of many neighbors who are recovering from homelessness and addiction. Many of them have told me they consider ISP their church. It is where they can be their authentic selves without feeling judged. On the contrary, feeling loved and in turn called to love others. I love ISP, and I'd love it if you donated. Thank you, and God bless. Thank you.
So shouldn't Haley House be there forever? Just forever? And of course, the answer, because a lot of people know Haley House, but shouldn't the Ignatian Spirituality Project too just be there forever? That's what legacy giving is. We have Dave Hinton talk a little bit about the IVC here in New England. And I was just reminded of something that David said about many of the volunteers who would literally, occasionally a volunteer has commented to him, in some ways, the Ignatian Volunteer Corps has really kind of like become, a substitute for my church. It's because it's the place that from which I draw so much, just because of the connections with the other volunteers and with sharing the kind of work that those volunteers are doing. So, Dave, can we talk for a couple minutes? And by the way, he's the one. He can tell you about what his budget is. I can never figure it out.
Our budget is small, but you could make it bigger. The IVC has been around 30 years. This is a big 30th anniversary of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. We are in New England, the teenage member of the IVC. We're 16 years old this year, and we're still growing. We have 55 right now, 55 Service Corps members, and 3 more interviewing. We have been 4 years in a row with more than 50 Ignatian volunteers serving. We partner with 33 nonprofits like ISP and Haley House in more than a dozen Massachusetts and Rhode Island cities and towns. Ignatian volunteers have multiple roles. We work assisting especially recently arrived immigrants, like at the Irish Immigration Center, now Rion, downtown with Catholic Charities, in South Boston and Brockton, with Casserly House in Roslindale. We work with women and men experiencing homelessness, such as the ISP and both Providence and in Boston, men's and women's programs. Education from the preschool level with Nurtury, the longest daycare program, I believe, in New England, and through grammar school with the Friends of the Rafael Hernandez School in Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, into the high school levels, Christopher Ray Boston, for example. We work with the nativity schools, like Arthur is working at Nativity in Worcester. We have a volunteer also at Nativity in Boston. We have people working in schools in Providence also, also with adults, teaching adults English as a second language, English for speakers of other languages now called. We work with programs for low-income homeowners, like my brother's keeper in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and in Easton, food and furniture delivery, with Springwell, with the elderly in greater Boston area, delivering meals to isolated elders in those areas. Also with kids with special needs. Ron Nix, who's helped make this program work tonight, works at Cotting School in Lexington. So there's a whole variety of things. Jim Nagel, as was mentioned, has been now at Haley House. This is what we really thrive on, is somebody like Jim, a labor lawyer who now 11 or 12 years, I think he's been at Haley House. There was no HR department there. And Jim, I think, still is the HR department at Haley House. So his contribution is in that one area that saves Haley House the expense of having to go out and hire somebody for that job with money they can use in other ways. Also, Kevin Ryan, John Butler, and Margaret Coughlin are currently with ISP. Jay Burke, who very humbly sat in this chair, I am sitting in a chair, before me. Jay came to Boston, Jay came to the ISP and really has made it with a lot of help too, but he has been a driving force in making ISP thrive, the men's program thrive in the Boston area. And we have people in Rhode Island doing that too. Kevin Ryan has been there for many years. So those are the kinds of people that we have, that we like it when they're impact. Nativity is very happy to have a planned giving Ignatian volunteer and Arthur Bergeron there, helping them plan for their future. That's the impact that Ignatian Volunteer can make. Our volunteers meet monthly. We build community with one another. There's a spiritual reflection component to the program. More than 30 men and women contribute their time to sit with an individual volunteer and dig deeper into the faith motivation for their work in service. We do it with a team of 5 of us, part-time. I'm almost full-time, stipended team member, a volunteer team member. We do this all on a budget of $200,000 right now, which is part of that $3 million budget of the big IVC program, which is in, by the way, 17 different locations in the country. Legacy giving to IVC would help us take time away from the work of fundraising and spending it more in building up the program and strengthening the volunteer contingent and finding other places in New England to work more with the agencies that we now do work with. It would also help the agencies we work with in keeping us from asking them for money for our partnership fees, which is one of the main ways we are supported. So helping IVC not only helps those agencies with key good men and women in key places, but also helps them from having to spend more of their money on that staffing. I think that's good. Pay attention to us, and we'll pay attention to those folks like ISP and Haley House and Cotting School and Nativity in Worcester. Thank you for listening. And I think I turn this over to Steve Everly now from the national office again.
Thanks, Dave. All right, bringing it home. So before we close out, does anybody have any questions, you here on Zoom or any of you in the room? What'd you say? Let's check in with the gallery and Zoom. Any questions for you all first? Excellent. You're an efficient crew. I like that.
I have one question there.
Oh,
And-
hang on. You know what?
No, it's hers.
No, I think it might be us. This is the. There you go. Try again.
So I had one question. That was in our last regional council meeting. We had talked about that maximum 18,500 gift that could be given. And right when the answer was about to be given to that topic, the audio went out. So I was wondering if we could have a repeat on why the 18,500 is not as relevant as it seems.
Because the for the federal the federal system is a combined gift and estate tax system, and it says when you die, you owe an estate tax if you have an estate of more than a given amount, which is 13 point something million dollars. While you're alive, you can make a gift, but you owe a gift tax unless you qualify for one of the two exclusions. And the first one is the one that you had just mentioned. It was originally an exclusion of $10,000. It's gone up to like 18,000 now, that you can give to any person any year. In addition to that, though, you have a lifetime exclusion equal to the estate tax exclusion, $13 million. So unless you're planning during your lifetime of giving away, in addition to those little gifts, more than $13 million, effectively, there is no gift tax. And by the way, I often say, I consider this to be it's a conspiracy of the accountants, because one of the parts of the federal law is that there's a gift tax return if you give away more than the magic annual number, that we'll call that $18,000 number. You're supposed to file a gift tax return with the IRS, supposedly so that the return can get sent to some little nebbish in DC who keeps track of these things and who subtracts your extra gift from the $13 million that you're allowed to give during your lifetime, right? But one of the interesting things about that is, like many IRS filing requirements, the only penalty for failure to file is a percentage of the tax you would have owed. But in this case, you never owe a tax because you're never going to get to $13 million. And so if you're tax preparer at the end of a year, makes you file this form and, give me all your information. Did you make any gifts over $18,000? And you say yes. And then he says, oh, well, then you have to file this form and I'm going to charge you $750 to do this, right? You say, well, what if I don't? And find out what he says. Because he's going to say nothing. Nothing happens if you don't. That's the answer to the question. All right?
Thank you.
Practical answer to that question. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Any questions from you all? Any questions from you
I
all?
got a question. I don't know, Arthur, Steve, or too much to direct it, but there's about 5,000 nonprofits in the state of Massachusetts, and they spawn, geometrically on a regular basis, and most of them, budget-wise, are fairly small organizations. Excuse me. What you're talking about here, with the possible exception of some of the stuff with the donor advised funds, really goes to the long game. How do you build an endowment or build legacy gifts that largely would fund, longer needs? A lot of those organizations, Dave, I don't know the makeup of the IVC membership organizations, but a lot of them would have very rudimentary, if any, fundraising capacity. Mm. So what do you do running parallel to this effort that's going to give the capacity to those organizations? They don't need to know all the intricacies of plan giving, but they do need to understand how to articulate this and take it out. And so it seems to me you've got to have something running concurrent if you're going to grow this in a way that's going to show measurable results that they need near term to fund their operation. That's pretty good, huh? Steve.
I feel like that might be a me question. I I mean, it's a complex answer. I mean, many nonprofits have an endowment established for just such a thing, so that when a planned gift comes in, it goes into that endowment. Like Arthur said, an organization like IVC, if we had a $75 million endowment, it would be kicking out enough money to cover our annual expenses. That is a goal of IVC's. It's actually part of our strategic plan goal, is to establish an endowment. The organizations that don't have that, they can still benefit from the planned gift, as in the case of Haley House. So I think, though, that a point I wanted to make kind of in closing is, not that we have to close right now if we have any more questions, but I think it's important. That's a great story about being surprised. And I've heard stories like that before about nonprofits being surprised. In some ways, like, you don't want to be surprised by a gift. It's like, getting engaged. Like, if someone asks you to marry them and it's a surprise, like, you probably shouldn't marry that person. So if you're planning to make a planned gift, if you're planning to leave a legacy, or, name a nonprofit or a charity in your IRA, or put it in your will, let the nonprofit know, because then it's a conversation between the donor and the organization, and you, as the donor, like, you're in the driver's seat for a little bit of that, to be able to say, this is what I want my gift to do, and it's up to the nonprofit to be able to clearly communicate what it needs to be able to do its mission. At IVC, we've established the Isabella Roser Society, which is our society for planned givers. Fun, just quick fact about Isabella Roser: she was a wealthy widow that befriended Saint Ignatius before he was a saint. Back when he was just Saint what's his name, and she essentially bankrolled his founding of the Society of Jesus, and I believe she was briefly considered a Jesuit, because she said, the Society of Jesus sounds really good, and can I be a member of the society? And Saint Ignatius said, sure. And then and then eventually a bishop got involved and was like, no. But what a legacy, right? Like, she bankrolled the founding of the Society of Jesus, and here we are 500 years later. She made a difference, and so that's why we've named our Plan Giving Society. But I know other nonprofits have that kind of giving circle or society, so be sure to communicate that. Any other questions?
Can I take a stab at that question too? So in America,
In that case, you may want to be.
Oh, yeah. This is Kyle coming back.
So in America, there's about 2.5 million nonprofits, and that number has exponentially increased in the last 3 or 4 years.
And you want to be speaking more like, just so that the machine hears you.
Yep. What a lot of people don't know is that charities, public charities, have to meet what's called this public support test, which means that a third of their contributions have to come from the general public, and individual donors are capped at 2%. So a lot of people start these charities, these 501c3s, with the right intentions in mind, and they're like, I really want to make a difference in this specific area. They don't realize they have a huge fundraising ambition to do. The IRS usually gives people about a 5-year window to meet that support test. So what we've noticed over at Fidelity is that over the years now, a lot of these charities are starting to merge together, and starting to, even some charities are dissolving, or after 5 years, if you don't meet that public support test, you have to turn into a private foundation, which a lot of these charities don't want to do. So I think you might see in the next probably 5-10 years a pretty big consolidation in America with U.S. charities, and just in the way that they operate, mostly because of that reason. While I'm talking to you, is like, you've heard a lot of stuff about IRAs, right? It's like, why is this such a good asset to leave to charity? And it's because, and I'm not going to bore you with the tax details, but there's this a couple of years ago, the Secure Act 2.0 came out, and it sort of changed the game with the next generation. So IRA assets are pretty much the worst that you can possibly leave to the next generation, because the next generation now has to pull that money out in 10 years and take the income hit as a result. So for kids that are successful, it's like, okay, now you're going to give them $2 or $3 million in an IRA account that they have to withdraw and get more taxable income as a result. So that's why I think, as a theme of tonight, it's like IRA assets in a legacy plan are the best asset to leave to charity because of those reasons.
What the hell with the kids?
But yeah, I mean,
The kids
right. The kids, you should give them like your trust assets or stuff in your bank account, things like that.
So if we want to set something up, what do we do next?
In terms of, Just like you're saying,
donor advised fund
Yeah.
or our assets for legacy.
Talk to him
yeah,
after we close, because that's one of the points, or to an entity that has the ability to do that.
yeah. I think the
It's very fun.
the overall hack of donor advised funds that I've at least noticed in the last probably 5 years is to use the account almost like as an accounting tool for yourself. So we have a lot of what are called give grantors at Fidelity, which are basically people that use the donor advised fund strictly as an administrative tool, where they're like, listen, I give $20,000 a year or $5,000 or $10,000 a year, but I give it to all these different charities. So in April, you're digging through your folders and you're looking at your check register with your credit card statements. And it's like, did I give to this charity? Where's the tax receipt for this one? Did I use my credit card online? Did I write them a check? All of that in the donor advised fund is eliminated because at the end of the year, you just hand your CPA one receipt from the donor advised fund, which is how people use it. We have donors that fund it with $5,000 and give it out in $50 increments to hundreds of charities. So, yeah, that's sort of the hack.
Thank you.
Steve.
Any other questions?
So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone here in person. Thank you on Zoom for taking some time out of your night to learn about plan giving and think about your legacy. What do you want to leave behind? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're closing.